Welcome to the debate. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you're in a boardroom. A massive server migration is, well, it's actively failing,
Always a fun scenario.
right? It's costing the company thousands of dollars a minute. The tension is just, it's palpable. And in the middle of this chaos, your IT director looks at the team and says, let's take this offline and circle back.
Oh, classic.
Yeah. But the question is, did they just save the meeting from descending into unmanageable panic by, invoking a standardized protocol? Or did they just kill the only chance to solve the immediate problem by hiding behind polite corporate jargon?
And that is exactly the tension we're navigating today. It's the difference between using language to actually manage a crisis and, well, using language to comfortably avoid one.
Right. Because today we're examining the highly formalized lexicon we call business English. We're looking at the core vocabulary, the standard phrasing, and the unspoken rules of etiquette that pretty much define modern corporate communication.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. And the fundamental question is this: does standardized business English provide an essential, objective framework that builds confidence and accelerates career opportunities? Or does its strict adherence to etiquette and rigid phrasing create, an alienating environment, one that stifles authentic communication and stalls actual progress?
Exactly. I will be arguing that this formalized language is the vital connective tissue of professional success.
And I will be arguing that an over-reliance on these formal structures acts as a massive, often invisible barrier to genuine participation, clarity, and, frankly, innovation. Okay, well, let me outline my position first. The premise of mastering business English is that it provides an objective, shared reality for everyone in an organization, because the modern workplace is incredibly complex.
Sure.
You have cross-functional teams, right? Engineers, marketers, financial analysts.
All speaking different languages, basically.
Literally and figuratively. They're often spread across different global offices and time zones. They all possess different cognitive styles and cultural baselines. If everyone brings their own subjective, highly individualized communication style to a volatile project, you get friction.
Right.
Having a universally understood lexicon removes that ambiguity. Take a concept like a deadline or a budget. In standard business English, we aren't just talking about dates and dollars. We are establishing a binary pass-fail state that everyone agrees upon.
A binary state.
Yes. It strips away emotional interpretation and creates a stable coordinate system. Furthermore, utilizing formal structures like standard email protocols or meeting agendas, it establishes a necessary baseline of professional respect. It removes the cognitive load of social navigation. It allows professionals to focus their mental energy purely on the work itself.
See, I view that stable coordinate system very differently. I fundamentally challenge the premise that rigid professional vocabulary inherently improves communication. There is a pervasive, almost antiquated belief in corporate culture that using informal language is a definitive mistake.
Because it often is.
But is it? If you look at the reality of how teams actually fail, the greatest threats to any business aren't slang or, improper formatting. The greatest threats are employees not asking for clarification and employees being afraid to participate.
My position is that forcing professionals into strict linguistic templates creates the exact intimidation that causes them to withdraw. When you prioritize etiquette, formal phrasing, and strict vocabulary over the simple act of human connection, you manufacture anxiety.
I don't know if I'd say you manufacture anxiety.
You do. People become so worried about utilizing the correct business vocabulary that they choose silence. Ultimately, this harms the very teamwork and collaboration this formalized language was supposedly designed to facilitate.
Okay, let's dive right into that idea of the linguistic template, because you are framing these standard phrases as constraints, and I view them as highly efficient tools. Tools for what, though?
For operation. Think of business English as a universal operating system in a computer network. Yes, an operating system operates on strict rules, and it might seem rigid to the individual user, but those rules are what ensure that all the disparate components on the network can interface without crashing.
Okay.
And in a business, those components are colleagues, managers, and clients.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Human beings aren't computer components. We don't process information in binary code. We rely on nuance, tone, and context.
True. But human interactions in a high-stakes environment require a protocol to prevent that nuance from devolving into emotional friction.
Emotional friction is just people having reactions.
But it derails the work. Think back to that IT crisis I mentioned at the start. When a meeting is drifting into panic or hostility, a standard phrase like, "Let's move on to the next point," or "Could you clarify that for the group?" It acts as a universally recognized polite mechanism to reset the agenda.
Right.
It depersonalizes the correction. I'm not saying you are rambling and ruining my schedule. I am invoking the shared operating system. It protects feelings while preserving the efficiency of the project. It provides a container for the stress.
A container for the stress or a lid to keep the actual issues from being addressed?
That's entirely cynical.
No, think about it. Because that operating system metaphor assumes the primary goal of these phrases is always actual productive progress, but in my experience and in observing how corporate culture actually functions, this system is frequently used to mask a lack of progress.
Give me an example of how a standard efficiency phrase masks progress.
Easy. Look at phrases like, "I'll get back to you," or "Let's schedule another meeting to align."
Those are perfectly normal phrases.
On the surface, sure. If we stick to your operating system metaphor, these sound like efficient organizational commands. They sound responsible. But how often are they actually utilized as polite deflections?
I mean, sometimes.
Often. They function as escape hatches to avoid actual decision-making. Because the language is so formalized and perfectly polite, it gives the illusion of productivity. A manager can say, "Let's take this offline and circle back when we have more bandwidth," and they sound perfectly professional.
They do.
They have utilized the vocabulary flawlessly, but functionally, they have just killed the momentum of the room. The rigidity of the language prioritizes sounding professional over being productive. It allows people to hide behind etiquette.
Okay, but the fact that a tool can be misused by a bad manager doesn't invalidate the tool itself?
It proves the tool has built-in flaws.
Not necessarily. "I'll get back to you" might sometimes be a deflection, yes, but it is also a vital function when an employee genuinely needs to consult data before providing a definitive answer.
Assuming they actually consult the data.
Imagine the alternative. Without that standard acceptable phrase, an employee in a high-pressure meeting might feel forced to guess just to satisfy the room.
Or they could just say, "I don't know yet."
But that feels dangerous to a lot of people. If they guess, that leads to inaccurate data being passed to a client, which is a far worse outcome than a slight delay. The formal structure provides a safe harbor for accuracy.
Does it provide a safe harbor? Or does it build a wall? Because the insistence on this formal structure is exactly what creates the pressure in the first place. When corporate guidelines insist that informal language is unprofessional, they are making a massive prescriptive judgment about how people are allowed to think and express themselves.
And they should make that judgment. Professionalism requires a standard of conduct. Let's talk about the actual delivery of these concepts. Mastering the pronunciation and deployment of complex, multisyllabic business terms, words like negotiation, opportunity, revenue generation, and delivering them without retreating into casual slang, it projects competence.
To who?
To everyone. When you are representing your company's financial projections to a major client, informal language undermines the gravity of the data. Formal language signals that you take the interaction seriously. It establishes authority.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered whether they are taking it seriously or if they are just playing it safely?
What's the difference?
There is a massive difference between taking a project seriously and being terrified of breaking etiquette. You are assuming a monolith of perfect performance that simply doesn't exist in modern dynamic business.
I'm not demanding perfection, just a baseline.
But let's look at the cognitive overload this weaponized formality creates. Why do you think people speak too quickly in presentations or fail to ask for clarification when they don't understand something?
Usually because they haven't prepared adequately or they just lack experience in the role.
No, I have to disagree. It is almost always driven by cognitive bandwidth being consumed by anxiety. And that anxiety is generated by the pressure to maintain this flawless formal performance.
Anxiety is just part of work, though.
But this is unnecessary anxiety. When an employee is forced to code switch into business English, they're essentially running two cognitive processes simultaneously. First, they have to formulate their actual intelligent idea. Second, they have to run that idea through an internal translator to ensure it meets the rigid criteria of corporate jargon, perfectly pronouncing negotiation and meticulously avoiding slang.
You're suggesting the formality itself causes the communication breakdown?
Absolutely. It creates an environment of constant linguistic surveillance. Imagine a junior colleague who has a brilliant out-of-the-box solution to a massive scheduling bottleneck.
Okay.
But if they aren't confident they can articulate it using the strict parameters of business English, if they are worried they will use the wrong vocabulary and be judged as unprofessional, they will choose the path of least resistance, which is silence.
I think that's an extreme example.
It happens every day. The fear of participating is the direct result of enforcing an artificial corporate dialect. The true priority of any business should be raw communication, even if it's informal, messy, or grammatically imperfect. If it solves the problem and meets the deadline, clarity of thought should always trump formality of phrasing.
I hear what you're saying, but I think you are conflating the initial learning curve with the long-term outcome. Yes, acquiring standard business English requires effort. And yes, initially, there might be a high cognitive load, and there might be anxiety for a junior employee.
A very high load.
But mastering this professional vocabulary is exactly what builds long-term confidence. It is a transitional discomfort that leads to empowerment. Let's examine how professionals actually onboard into these environments. Take the standard professional introduction.
You mean the standard script of stating your name, title, and department?
Exactly. Stating your name, your position, your department, your core responsibilities, and your immediate goals. To me, this is a profoundly empowering cognitive scaffold.
Empowering?
Yes. For a new professional stepping into a daunting corporate headquarters on their first day, the sheer amount of ambiguity is terrifying. Their prefrontal cortex is already overwhelmed. Having a structured, objective way to present oneself acts as a reliable blueprint.
But it's so robotic.
It completely removes the paralyzing question of, what do they expect me to say right now? The framework gives them the ability to participate without freezing. It's a script, yes, but it is a script that allows them to safely step onto the stage and begin building their professional identity.
Okay, I look at that exact same scripted introduction, and I see the psychological mechanism of reducing a human being to a cog in a machine.
A cog in a machine is incredibly cynical. It's simply a professional introduction designed for efficiency.
But look at what it actually does to interpersonal dynamics. It trains individuals to disassociate from their actual skills and personalities. A strict litany of position, department, and responsibilities completely strips away authentic human connection.
Do you really need a deep human connection to file a TPS report?
If we look at the most complex situations in any business, negotiating with a difficult customer, or working in an agile team to pivot a product line, these are the exact situations where rigid adherence to a script will cause you to fail. Empathy, adaptability, and the ability to read the room are what make a team function.
Well, sure, eventually.
If I am in a crisis meeting and a colleague's default mode of interaction is merely reciting their responsibilities and relying on standard phrases, they haven't communicated who they are or how they can help. They've just read me their metadata.
Then in a fast-paced business context, their metadata is exactly what I need to know to collaborate with them. If we are working on a strict deadline with a limited budget and the server migration is failing, I don't necessarily need to know their life philosophy or their unique communication style.
You don't need their life philosophy, but you need to trust them.
I need to know their department, their exact technical responsibilities, and what resources they control, so we can coordinate our efforts instantly. The formal structure of business English protects our time. It creates boundaries so we can focus our collective energy on the project itself, rather than navigating each other's personalities.
And yet, if you lack genuine rapport with your colleagues, the project suffers the moment a true crisis hits. Because trust is not built on standard phrases. You cannot script trust.
You can build trust through competence.
Trust is built on authenticity and vulnerability. When the communication remains entirely on the level of, please find the attached document and let me know if you have any questions, you are building a superficial network.
It's polite.
When we tell professionals that their natural, informal way of speaking is a mistake, we are telling them to leave their authentic selves at the door. And when they do that, we lose the creative friction and the actual honest communication that a business relies on to innovate.
We have to separate personal authenticity from professional clarity. The standardized rules of business English aren't asking people to change their core identity. They're providing a specialized toolkit for a highly specific environment.
It feels like forced assimilation to a lot of people.
When you write an email that begins with "Dear Mr. Smith" and ends with "I look forward to hearing from you," you aren't sacrificing your soul. You are utilizing a universally recognized protocol that signals respect, acknowledges the recipient's time, and prompts a reciprocal response.
Right. But
This standardization is exactly what allows multi-departmental and especially global offices to function together. Without it, how does an engineer in Berlin efficiently collaborate with a marketer in Tokyo? The shared etiquette bridges cultural and linguistic gaps rather than creating them.
it bridges gaps for those who have already mastered the code. But it creates a massive exclusionary barrier for those who haven't. And that's the insidious part of this linguistic landscape.
Insidious?
Yes, the very concept of business English implies there is a definitively correct way to speak in the workplace, which defaults to a highly specific, often Western corporate standard. The moment someone uses incorrect business vocabulary or structures an email too informally, they are immediately judged.
They're judged on their professionalism.
And they aren't judged on their merit of their ideas or their technical ability. They are judged on their lack of fluency in this artificial corporate dialect. It becomes a tool for gatekeeping.
Which is precisely why standardizing and teaching this vocabulary is so crucial so the barrier is removed. The solution to gatekeeping isn't to tear down the gate and let the sheep scatter, it's to give everyone the key.
But why is there a gate in the first place?
If we abandon the standard, what replaces it? Do we just accept chaos? Do we have meetings where half the people are using highly localized slang that the other half doesn't understand, and we spend 20 minutes just trying to define our terms? The structure isn't just necessary, it is the only way a complex organization scales.
I'm not advocating for chaos, and I'm not suggesting we abandon shared definitions. I'm advocating for a fundamental shift in priority. We need to prioritize mutual understanding and psychological safety over linguistic conformity.
Okay.
If a colleague explains a complex technical bottleneck using informal language, or even uses the wrong corporate buzzword, but everyone in the room understands the point, it shouldn't be classified as a mistake simply because it lacked the sanctioned corporate sheen. We need to stop policing the container of the message and start valuing the substance.
But the container often dictates how the substance is received. Look, as we draw to a close, let me summarize my position in light of where this discussion has taken us.
Please do.
I maintain that despite the rigidity you see, the shared vocabulary and polite protocols of business English provide the essential scaffolding for clear, objective business operations. From defining exactly what a project's parameters are to structuring an email that cuts through inbox clutter, these standards drastically reduce cognitive load. They ensure that colleagues, managers, and clients can interact smoothly, minimizing the risk of emotional misinterpretation. It is a necessary framework that, once mastered, truly does build the confidence and career opportunities it promises. It allows the work to speak louder than the interpersonal friction.
And I maintain that we must remain deeply critical of letting this scaffolding become a cage. While having a shared baseline of vocabulary can be useful for alignment, warning professionals that informal language is a failure generates the very fear that stifles vital participation.
Even if it's a fear of being misunderstood?
When sounding professional takes precedence over authentic interaction, we end up with boardrooms full of polite phrases like, "I'll get back to you," which perfectly simulate the appearance of work, while actual, meaningful progress stalls. We sacrifice the agility of human thought for the comfort of corporate uniformity.
It seems we do agree on one fundamental point, even if our methods diverge entirely. Absolute clarity is the ultimate goal of workplace communication.
We absolutely converge there. Nobody wants to be misunderstood. Our divergence is purely on the mechanism. You see strict formality and standard protocols as the guarantor of that clarity, whereas I see them as a potential hindrance to the raw, genuine human exchange required to truly understand one another and solve complex problems.
Which suggests there is certainly more to explore on how these frameworks are applied in real-world scenarios. We've looked at the theory and the psychology today, but the daily reality of workplace communication remains a complex, constantly evolving landscape.
Especially as teams become more global and remote.
It really does. The rules are changing right under our feet. Thank you for joining us today for this intellectual exchange. As you step back into your own offices, virtual or otherwise, we leave you with this thought. When you send that next perfectly formatted email, or when you sit in your next status meeting, take a moment to look at the linguistic steel beams you've constructed around yourself and your team. Are they supporting the weight of your ideas, or are they just trapping the workers inside?